Hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Bingbing, Susan, hi, Yi.
Hey, welcome back, Feynman, E, and Bin Bin.
Hi, folks.
Thank you, Susan.
I've just started sharing my screen. Can everyone see?
Yeah.
So last week, let me quickly check if Akash is on the call. Yeah, thanks for confirming, Sajay. Akash is not yet here. I think today we will be going over our buddy testing result. Thank you for participating in validating the early bits E. And I know you've posted a lot of your result in the document already. And today, let's use this meeting to go through like any items that we may want to fix before we RC. And what we're hoping to do is we're going to wrap up all the testing, evaluate which bugs we need to take before RC. If there's no blockers, then we will proceed with RC release end of this week or early next week. Um, is everyone okay with this plan?
Sounds good.
Um, so I think Bin Bin, you've added some discussion items already. Do you want to go through these two specifically related to multi-tenancy first, and then we can walk through the document for to go through the validation results?
I think we can go through the validation first.
Okay, sure. So the link to the buddy test scenarios here from last week's meeting notes. Yeah, thank you for adding all the installation and the signing commands, Akash. It was super helpful. I believe, so this section are the scenarios around the inline providers, and then followed by the section of the Azure Key Vault scenarios. And then there's another section for the registry scopes. And thank you for giving the numbering the test cases, and then we can use this table at the end to quickly look at the coverage so far. So for the local testing scenarios, I'm still working on the validation, Akash. So I was able to validate using RSA 256 and the cosine generated key pairs, but I'm still having a little bit of trouble with the, I think it's the RSA 2048. It wasn't picking up the right, it was picking up the right policy, but it wasn't using the key that I was expecting.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so it was giving like this key is invalid. I have to look closer at the um, verifier report. And some of the other scenarios that I'm trying to validate while I do this is because I'm doing the validation for like multiple different key types, I try to specify like um, certificate 0, certificate 1, certificate 2 when I install Ratify. And what I've noticed is it was able to initialize key 1 and key 3, but it somehow skipped key 2. And then I went back to manually define it. So I'll have another, like, I'll see if I can repro that to see if there's anything without charts that may have like some loop in, looping logic bugs. The other one I was trying is Rego. When Rego mode is true, at the moment, our default policy is the config policy. With Rego equals to true, I imagine we should be using a Rego policy that's similar to our default config policy. Binbin, is that correct?
Yeah, the default one is very similar to the one we used for the config policy.
Yeah. Do we expect any difference in the format of the verifier report? So what I've noticed is we do, yeah. There's some extra nesting.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's different. You have to add you got to change the constraint template, but the new version of the verify report, I think, been added for Rego policy.
I see. So, and I think maybe in the with the default configuration, nesting is turned on. So I see the cosine verifier trying to validate, was expecting nested artifacts. So there was like a little failure somewhere in the log that says, oh, I wasn't able to find any nested references. So we'll take a look there. And again, I'm also going to try playing with the different scopes to make sure different keys could match with different images. So I'm still going through the result, and I'll try to collect the result, and I'll sync with you offline, Akash.
Sure, sounds good. Thank you for trying it. Definitely get all these weird, quirky results. This is exactly what we need to surface. So.
Yeah. And in the next section, E was able to do a lot of validation around the key vault integrations for cosine. E, did you find anything that could be a blocker for RC?
One thing is, I think, can you scroll down a bit?
Yeah.
One thing is related to the disabled key. So this is the AKB scenario. So in AKB, you can disable key, and also you can set expiration date for a key. So once a key is disabled, it should not be used for verification. And also, I observed that you can even configure the disable key in Ratify. So I don't think that is correct. And if you use the cosine CLI to use the disable key, it will be a failure as well. So I think this is the one issue I found that it should be fixed. And I also reported the issue on that. And yeah, I reported several issues. I think the disabled key, this one is most important. There are some other, yeah.
Sorry, on the disabled key, was it initializing a key from the disabled state? So when we apply the CRD, CR, that key is already disabled, or we first applied the CR and then we fetched it. The key was cached on the pod, and then the key got disabled, and there were no refresh on the key to disable it from the cache. Which scenario is that?
Yeah, so that's why I mark it as a partial passed. So actually, this is related to the test case 11. So if at first you configure disable the key, it should not be fetched. However, currently Ratify fetched the disable key. The KMP, key management provider, showed it's successful. then this key can be used for verification. This is the one thing. Another thing is that the key, at first the version is enabled. It's good, and you configure it in KMP. It can be used for validation. It's good, but after some time, there could be some issue with this version of key. Then user disable it. It should not be used. So currently, from Ratify point of view, we do not regularly pull the latest available version from AKB, right? So currently, user has to manually remove the disabled key from the KMP and set a correct version of key. I think this part it works because we definitely support fetching the enabled key. So I'm testing two scenarios. So that's why I mark it as partial passed.
Yeah, sounds good. So I think the one we need to address first, if the key is in disabled state, we should not fetch that.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, this is the this is one of the issue. I think we should fix it. There are other one like the authentication, for example. We need to access ACR. Sorry, I'm testing using the ACR, Azure Container Registry, and also using the Azure Key Vault, right? So I'm testing the authentication, whether there will be some issues, especially initially I assigned the identity that I used with the necessary roles. Then over time, I remove some roles. So that means this identity cannot access ACR or the AKV. However, I found it works for the store that after I remove, for example, the pool role for the identity, and then after some time, and the referrals cannot be released. But from the message point of view, it is not that clear. I checked the Ratify log. There are some other logs shows that, for example, for one, some messages indicating this is authentication issue, but from the message for the verification report, it is not that clear. It just shows some referral store failure, but it could be different reasons. So it's better that we can have a specific reason for this case. For the AKV, because the key reconcile, my understanding is that if there is a failure, we will reconcile the key, right? Regularly. But if initially the key is configured successfully, I think, I mean, in the KMP, and with the right identity for accessing the key from the AKV, then after some time, I removed some rows for this identity. But it seems that as the key is cached, so from user point of view, this identity can still access the key vault for replication. I think this is also a problem, especially if the identity has some issues that user want to disable it. However, user can take some actions from for example, from the Azure point of view, but from Ratify point of view, it will not be refreshed because we cached the key initially, right? With the identity.
Correct. In the past, we had a discussion with Xinghe on the scenario of if there was an error fetching the certificate, if we had enabled a rotation scheduler, and the preferred behavior was to keep the cache. Do you believe that if there was an error that we should evict from the cache? From the perspective Xinghe is coming from is because if it was a error, like for example, somehow we were like network error that in fetching the public key, or someone accidentally removed the access from for the identity to access the public key, that we still want to maintain like production environment stability. Like we don't want to block deployment. So they've specifically asked for this sort of scenarios to keep the cache of the public key.
I think it's different. In my case, the identity doesn't have the right role. So
Yeah.
maybe based on the response, we can know which situation we need to differentiate from.
Okay.
The reason why I marked this test case as passed is because currently we don't have this regular reconcile, right?
Right.
So we can document it if if user think one identity should not be used for access AKV, they need to from Azure point of view they need to remove the role, and from the Ratify point of view they need to reconfigure the KMP. So this works from documentation point of view, but these are not the desired experience. It's better that we can regularly check this status to prevent the unauthorized identity to access the key. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for the feedback. We will review the documentation and make that clear.
Yeah, there are some other case like test 10. It's also related to that. Currently, we don't have a regular refresh the key mechanism, so customer needed to manually remove some keys, something like that. But it works as long as we can document it. If there are some issues, you need to manually update the configuration. So in that case, for example, because key don't have any key itself, I mean the key pair doesn't have any expiry and the revocation like certificates. So in this case, user has to configure the version of a key. Otherwise, if specific version has some problem, user cannot remove it, because if you don't configure it, we will always pull the latest one, right? Latest version of the key. However, if the latest version have some issues, user need to disable it or mark it expiry from the AKV. There's no way to do it before we can regularly check the status. So in that case, user need to configure the version of the key. Then later, if they rotate the key with a new version, they need to do another manual configuration again. This is more from security point of view. So later, if some version of key has some issues, user need to specifically remove it from the KMP. Otherwise, there's no way to do that unless we support the automatic refresh.
Yeah, are we targeting some of the refresh scenarios in Ratify 1.3?
Yeah, I think I have that list in actually we have the issue that reported previously by I didn't remember name, sorry. We have that issue that the key rotated, however Ratify did not fetch automatically. We have that issue. I think that issue is planned for 1.3.
Yeah. So we can
Yeah.
include it in the doc as well that we will be addressing and improving this experience in 1.3.
Yeah, so currently the way is user need to manually specify the version, and if that version has some issue, they need to manually remove it from the KMP. And if the identity has some issue, they need to manually remove it from the KMP. So some manual work. These are not a desired experience, but we can improve it later.
Yeah, I believe in the CRD references section, we have like the limitations documented, but we'll review that section again to make sure the user is aware and aware of the action item required if they disable the key or
Yeah.
remove roles. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I also created two issues for documentation. I will write a document from user point of view to cover all the scenarios, the normal scenarios, the key rotated scenarios, especially from AKV point of view, if the key is disabled, some scenarios, so that user know with current version what they can do.
Cool. Any questions, feedback related to cosign before we move on to the multi-tenancy scenarios?
By the way, I want to mention that the registry scope, it works well. I really like it. And I hopefully in the near future for notary project signature, we can also have this fancy function. It's really good. Thanks, Akash.
Thanks, E.
Cool. So for the multi-tenancy scenarios, Binbin, I haven't had a look to take a look. I'm aware of the table. Would you like to talk about the section breakouts?
Yeah, so basically I divided the test case into two parts. One is for the cluster-wide use case, and actually this is the default behavior, and it also should be the same as the behavior in V1.1. So for users, if they want to use the multi-tenancy, they could just use the cluster-wide resources. And another one is to test the namespace scenario. And so if you scroll down a bit, so I have two tables. This one is for the cluster-wide use case, and because we both support the third store and KMP, so we want you to test both cases. And if you scroll down to the namespace cases, so there are can you keep scrolling down?
Yeah. Okay. Namespace use cases. Yep.
Yeah. So for namespace use case, I create some like test cases for like if for example if we deploy image to a certain namespace like namespace one, and then we want to check if it can be like it can use the correct resources we define in each namespace. Like for example, for the first two cases, test 910 is checking in the same namespace, and test 11 is using different namespace resources which should be failed. And also, I can scroll down to the bottom. I think E also creates some new test cases, and he already did some testing on his test cases. I'm still in progress in the testing, but I feel we have some overlap of the test cases. So basically, I will update the sys table once I'm done with all the test cases. And so yeah, thanks for help on the testing here. We found a bug actually on the mutator, so which we will discuss later.
Yeah. Thank you. Binbin, I have some quick question for the multi-tenancy scenario setup.
Yeah.
So, so I can think of like I'm the one of the role. I'm the cluster admin, and I install Ratify, and I have access to all the namespaces on the cluster. And the other scenario is I'm just a user for team A, and I only have admin access for the namespace 1, and I don't have access to the entire cluster. So if I deploy Ratify today with the default parameters we have, where we try to instantiate all the cluster scoped verifiers and stores, and for this case is not supported, right?
Do you mean the case that everyone is using the cluster-wide resource?
More like if I was a namespace admin, not the
Yeah.
cluster admin, how do I install Ratify 1.2?
So first, I think it's the cluster admin's job to deploy the Ratify. And secondly, if we already have the cluster-wide resources like store, verify, policy, and even you are a namespace admin, you can still deploy your resources because it will firstly fetch the resources under this namespace, and it's not found, then it will fetch the resources in the cluster-wide. So basically, the user behavior would be the same as v1.1. Like, oh, you have any question?
Yeah, I think Bingbing, maybe you can finish your part first. I can share what I have tested from a user point of view later.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so basically like in v1.1, firstly we don't differentiate between like class admin or team admin. But if there are like difference between the class admin and team admin in v1.1, they should all of them should have the same behavior, like deploying any resources, any like workloads to any namespaces. So this is the same as v1.2 for the cluster-wide scenario.
I think Feynman, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, maybe it's not related to the multi-tenancy scenario only. I'm curious, have we covered any negative test cases based on the upgrade scenario? I mean, upgrade because I saw all of those test cases assume users deploy a fresh Ratify cluster, and I didn't see any test cases against the upgrade. So I'm thinking whether we should test some upgrade scenarios. For example, for those existing users, or we already have that, right?
Yeah, I added one yesterday.
Okay, so I think, yeah, I saw a few existing users may have this kind of scenario. So I want to avoid any regression problems.
Definitely. And I think it's worth adding automation for this as well in the future.
You mean have a GitHub Actions workflow to cover these negative test cases as end-to-end test cases, right?
Yeah. It is expected of us to maintain backwards compatibility between minor releases. So I think it's worth having a automated test for the upgrade scenario. And I think Gatekeeper, actually I saw in their documentation that they had a upgrade test, and I thought it's a good idea.
Yes, that's good.
Yeah, thank you, Raymond. We will do the upgrade test for sure.
Okay. I just look at this document today. So if there are any test cases that need my help, I'm willing to help and test those cases. Feel free to tag me.
That would be great if we can have more eyes on this, Feynman. Just as you start validating, you can put your name down on the assignee column. This is the right row down the right. So then at the end of the week, we'll assess again to see how we're doing with coverage.
Okay, so for the assignings column, if they are blank, that means these
Actually, if you
cases
scroll
are
down,
free to pick.
actually, if you can scroll down to the bottom, I think we have this is the complete table covering all the test cases.
Oh.
If there are no assignees in this table, that means they're open for application.
Oh, yes.
Okay, I will take a look at this table and see whether I can help for those cases.
Thank you.
Yeah, that'll be great. Thank you, Damon. I've also noticed, Akash, you had something to say before. Oh, and Sajay also had. Sajay, go ahead first.
Yeah, I just need to drop to join another meeting. But Akash and I were talking about like some next steps for Ratify for attestation verification. I think you folks can follow up maybe offline, and I'll catch up with you later. But just wanted to kind of make sure we discuss the options that we have and how we can get make some progress on this and put it on the board to track the issues.
Scenarios around attestations, yeah? Is that
Yes,
correct?
yes. This
Yeah.
is going to be probably a little different from using just referrers and whatnot, but there's some thinking. Maybe Akash, you can kind of elaborate once I've kind of dropped off, maybe.
Sure. Yeah, I'll fill everybody in.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, I'll add it to the agenda. Thanks, Sajay. Bye. Hey, Akash, did you have something about the multi-tenancy?
No, I just had stuff about the assign mutator issue that Binbin's going to talk about next, so we can talk about that.
Yeah, do you want? Oh, yes, you have.
Yeah. So first for the multi-tenancy, I think except the issue I found, I think overall it looks good. So so the first scenario I test is from organization owner or cluster admin that I want to apply the policy to all the namespace as we did usually. I verified it works. But I want to mention that I discussed with Bingbing that it is suggested that we use the new constraint templates and constraints because that including the namespace information. So it works both for namespace policy and also class-wide policy. And that new constraint template, it is what I used for testing. So this is the first scenario from class-wide. It works well as expected as usual. Then I tested from different team perspective that the cluster owner or organization owner, they install the Ratify. Then each team, they configure their own resources, including the policies, the resources including the store and the KMP. I didn't test the third store. I only focus on the KMP and also the verifier and also our and you know that Ratify has its own regular policy. So these four resources I tested for each team. They can create their own resources, and it works. And I also configured the another namespace try to access resource from another team, and it was forbidden. I think this is also good. And also the policies on different namespace, they work differently. I mean, they don't have impact with each other. Actually, I asked Bingbing for help, and especially for one namespace, I changed the regular policy, the Ratify regular policy, to just simply pass any verification, and it works. But for another namespace, it's use the default when we have that, there should be welfare reports. I think those work perfectly. There's no impact with each other. I think that's good. This is the second part, focusing on the namespace resources. The third case is as a cluster admin, I configured one KMP for all the namespace because for all my the case I'm try to simulate is that from my organization, I know only one key can be used for assign all the images. So I configure that KMP with the identity that as a class owner from class wide. And from the namespace, different team, they can reference to this class-wide resource, and it also works. So that means from different namespace, different team, they just configure, for example, the verifier refers the class-wide KMP. So this also works. So I think overall it is very good experience, just as usual, but configure the resource in different namespace. I think that's good. The only thing is that I need to from the namespace, the resource I need to the cluster owner needed to install the store, the class-wide store anyway in. So this is the only limitation. So I think if we couldn't fix it in time, maybe we can put in the document that currently we have a limitation. The cluster admin, they needed to configure a store class wild, and we have an issue to track that. Then later on, we can fix it. And also I have, this is for multi-tenancy. I also, there are two issues I just remembered, recalled, related to the KMP, the cosine case. So I didn't figure out a way that to verify images with two signatures signed using two different keys. I want the verification passed only the two signatures are verified. So currently it seems that as long as one signature passed the verification, the overall result is a success.
That's yeah.
I want yeah.
That's that actually mirrors the cosine behavior. Yeah, the CLI behavior.
Yeah, but actually there is one one ask from some users that they sign the image with two different keys, and the image actually pass different phases, right?
Yes, correct. Yeah. So the design document I have actually called that out as a goal. So if you remember, we were talking about that enforcement action of like any versus all. So that needs to be added. We need to add support for that and then triage when we want to add maybe 1.3 or 1.4 or however.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can track that later. There is one more thing also related to the cosine, but I didn't remember now. Sorry. Yeah, maybe I can check with Akash offline once I remember. Yeah.
So one thing that I did remember was the key types we support. So we only support RSA keys and the like EC keys, but we support them in PEM format only. Is there any ask to support like PKCS 11 standards where you're not actually interacting with the keys directly, and instead you're using some sort of signer verifier interface that gets reached out to do the verification?
At least for now, no specific ask on this.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. The context that came up was I was speaking to Ivan from Venafi, and he was mentioning how the Venafi platform recommends using PKCS 11, and I wasn't sure if that's a common recommendation that we'll start to see. So I know right now we don't support that, but
Do we have
that's
a
okay.
issue checklist?
I have not created an issue yet. I can make one though.
Yeah, maybe we can create one.
If this is an ask from our partners, I would suggest we ask the partners like Ratify to create the issue with their context and the detailed requirements, so
Okay.
we can understand why this should be prioritized in Ratify.
Yep, makes sense. Just to give context for those who aren't aware of PKCS, because I personally was not, the PKCS 11 standard basically is a standard for signing and verifying. So you aren't actually dealing with downloading any of the keys or certificates. You're dealing with an external authority that you trust, and you specify that via like a URI that you point to, and then the verification happens totally separate from the caller of the verification. So you don't download any certificates, you don't download any public keys. You basically reach out to this authority. They do the signing if you're signing, or they do the verifying on your end. They return back a result, and that's what you use. So it's particularly useful for like HSM, which I think are like hardware secure modules where the keys never exit the box, the physical device that you're dealing with. So that was the context that he had given it in.
Yeah, I think let's create an issue first.
Sure.
Yeah, I think it makes sense from that scenario point of view.
Thanks. For the issue 1458, assign mutator cannot pass image with namespace to ratify. Binbin E was just saying the action item here would probably like document that as a limitation. Does that sound good?
Yes. Also, as Akash mentioned, maybe we shouldn't have an issue on the OPA side, so to see if they can support this case.
Yep.
Cool. Next issue 1458. So yesterday I was having a little bit of issue with the TLS certificate rotation creation when I installed Ratify on the AKS cluster. I switched to a different machine. It was working, so we weren't sure if a customer would ever run into this, like just continue refreshing and it just blocks all the space in the log problem. So we think it's a good idea to to unblock the user if they just to use a disable rotation and bring their own TLS certificate. So Binbin, for the bringing back the workflow, is it from a documentation perspective, or do we need to add parameters in the chart?
No, I think it should be supported. We just we just need to add back the previous like workflow.
Cool. Is it just in the docs?
I'll try to find the previous doc. Maybe in the previous like versions, because I remember we migrate our doc from the Ratify report to the Ratify web report. So there should be a doc in maybe in some V0.8 or something, a previous version.
Yeah, sounds good. And Feynman issue 1386 discussed the transfer timeline.
Yeah, wondering what's the timeline of the Ratify repo transferring? I saw that issue has been closed last week. I assume all of those checklists, all of those check items are validated, and there are no blockers for transferring Ratify repos, because transferring repos is one of the process before we donate the Ratify to CNCF. So I want to double confirm what's the timeline and the net. And right now, is there any blockers or issues that we need to resolve before transferring those two repos?
Yeah, we're hoping to start the transferring process after 1.2 because we have to do large amount of remodule after we move. So 1.2 is likely, it's currently set to May 17th, but it could get delayed by a week depending on when we fix all the issues that we flagged for RC. So can you remind us what is the donation timeline? Like, was there a review meeting that was scheduled?
The review meeting was scheduled on June 11th.
June 11th. Yeah, cool. So I think, let's say realistically, if we release 1.2 May 24th, and then we immediately start on the repo move, so it'll probably happen around end of May. Does that align with the June 11th timeline?
Yeah, I think so. If we can finalize the repo transferring, I think by May 30, I think we still have enough time to validate and check if all of those process are working before June 11.
Yep. So basically during the review, they would be looking at the new repo. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Yeah, sounds good. I'll make a note here.
Should we add the notes to the notes section instead of the agenda items?
Yeah, sounds good. Drag. Yep. And then Sajay also mentioned, I'll just add to the agenda around attestations. Yeah, so yeah, Akash, feel free to.
So I know we've briefly talked about attestation verification support. We've talked about it in terms of doing the same verifications that we do for artifacts directly attached to images, but now wrapped in some sort of framework like the in-toto framework. So that involves invoking signature verification alongside an existing verifier like SBOM or vulnerability report, or a custom verifier where you could potentially even provide rego policy, and we would rego or Q or some sort of other policy language. This work is for considering verification of artifacts that are not refers. So there are scenarios where you may want to verify not at the refer artifact level, but at the image level. So for example, let's say we introduce a guac verifier. We're not interested in verifying particular supply chain artifacts that are associated as refers. We're interested in querying an external guac instance and then returning back either metadata about it or querying user-provided specific queries in the GraphQL database that is guac, and coming up with conclusions from that. So vulnerability reporting is a classic example. Instead of reading a vulnerability report as a refer artifact, you would query guac and ask it how many vulnerable images or how many vulnerabilities are associated with this image, and it would tell you directly. So that's one level. Now, there's also a higher level, which we are discussing, which is what if you use the content that you're going to be verifying could be anything. So let's say you pointed us to a URL or an OCI registry reference directly. Could Ratify not do any sort of store-based or refer-based lookup, but use the content that's pointed to directly to download it and then apply verifications on top of that? So where would it be used? Well, one scenario is for a deployment-based attestation that's associated with your Helm deployments. So in your Helm deployment, you have a collection of different resources that get created. So first, Helm will take your entire chart, boil that down to and render all of the templates, and then apply those templates in your cluster. Now, all of those templates, if you've inspected Helm managed resources before, they have annotations attached to it saying managed by this release, and oftentimes it's some unique release ID. So the idea would be that if you had a way in your Helm deploy pipeline to actually render those templates and then inventory that information into some sort of kind of like a bill of materials, and then stamp it with make it an attestation and add metadata in the attestation, including like what's the target cluster, what is the release ID, and then maybe even cloud provider specific things if they wanted to. At deploy time, when those resources are getting created at admission control time, you could have an accompanying annotation that's added to your resource that you're verifying that points to this deployment attestation that you want to verify. So you might say, okay, I want to make sure that the deployment attestation it verifies to true, which means that this resource that's being created belongs to this particular deployment that I've blessed. So you want to make sure that you're only deploying resources that map to resources, map to like a deployment ID that's found or a cluster ID that's found inside of your deployment attestation. So that's like a high level view. So that's the user scenario. But from a Ratify point of view, it would be involving like being able to verify arbitrary targets of data. So you could download the content from a registry if we point you to it, or any sort of file store or content addressable store. And you could perform the same level of verifications that we have been assuming are going to be refer artifacts, but now you do them you download them and do them on that content itself. So it's a little bit different way of thinking, but want to get people's thoughts on how we or should, how would we support that? What do people feel about supporting something like that?
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for going over that. Can you create an issue? And then we all will take some time and digest the new workflow, and we can maybe continue our discussion next week.
Yeah. This is not saying like, oh, we should do this, right? This is like, should at least think about it and
think about the scenario for sure. Yeah. Bin Feynman, any initial feedback?
Yeah, I think from my side, I'm aware of this different scenarios. As Akash mentioned, it could be image referrals, right? And it's including some, for example, in total framework, and also crack interface, and also I also saw some issues related to the deployment attestation, as Akash explained. So yeah, there are different scenarios and also considerations, and something is happening in the broad community in the supply chain phase, that's from different vendors or different vendor, they have different opinions. So I think overall it's good because there are some needs for solving some problems, right? And we just needed to spend some time how we can putting this piece together and find some best solution or unified solution to handle these different interfaces. Yeah, I think it is not something that we can do it immediately, but we needed to first from a scenario point of view, experience point of view, and also from design point of view, we have a lot of things to follow up later. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe create it as a discussion, Akash.
Yeah. I think before an issue, this is just discussion.
Yeah, let's start from there. And back to the action items for the RC release. So we'll continue our testing, and shall we? I think we'll need more time to stabilize, given there is. I think we at least want to fix the fetching disabled key. So we'll review the status again in the PR meeting. Does that sound reasonable, Akash?
Sure.
I have one, I have one suggestion. Because I created several issues, right? Not
Yeah.
all the issues are required for fix before 1.2 release. So the disabled key, I think is important. So maybe we can mark it as 1.2. And I also, that means that if later we find some issues and we discuss and think it should be fixed, and we create the issue and mark it as 1.2, then we will be very clear about the scope that we need to do before the release. And also in the chat, I send another issue for Akash to take a look, because during my testing, I have to delete the notation verifier in order to make a cosine verifier work, because both reports are combined together. And if the notation verifier report, there's no report, of course, because I didn't sign with notation. However, the overall result is a failure. So maybe Akash
Sure.
can take a look
I'll take a look.
whether I misconfigured something.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thanks
So
for
for now,
creating
I
the
think the
package.
disabled key is the one. And for some, yeah, for some other issue, I mentioned that those can have some work on the documentation, so that the user will be aware what action they will take, and we can address those issues later. And some are also related to some error messaging improvements. And I also find that in some other cases, there are also call stacks. I know Akash fixed some cases, but I still found in some other cases they are all call stacks. But I think those are not that important comparing with the disabled key. We can address those in later release.
Thanks you for pointing out the call stack one. That one is interesting because that's actually not a call stack from an error that we control. So we'll have to do something to fix that. Yeah, this is coming from the Azure SDK directly. So when we output the error already has the call stack in it. So I need to see if there's a way that we can configure the SDK to not emit the call stack in certain scenarios. But yeah, I'll take a look.
Yeah, feel free to comment and continue the discussion on the issue.
Yep.
Yeah. I think we can mark the issue that important for 1.2. For other issues, we can do that later.
Okay.
Yep. Sounds good. All right. Thank you all. We're at time today. I'll see you on Monday. Yep. Talk soon. Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye.